Hello again. Thank you for joining today's Nexenta webinar. This is the third of our four-part series titled Getting to Know NexentaStor and NexentaFusion. My name's Don Lopes. I'm joined by our field CTO, Michael Lechin. Michael, how are you?
Good morning, Don. Great to have everybody on today.
Yes, thank you for joining. As I mentioned to everyone, this is the third session of our four-part series highlighting our flagship product, NexentaStor and NexentaFusion. We had an overview session, a great session last week on Nexenta Edge, and we will be wrapping up the series next Thursday on our newer solution, Nexentacloud. A quick couple housekeeping items before we jump into the discussion here today. One, our lines are muted, just to avoid any background noise. We're also recording today's session so that if you're wanting to share with others, wanting to go back and review the session here later at a further future time, you'll have access to that. Please, though, we want to try to make it interactive. I know it's always tough. Please use the chat or notes function in the GoToWebinar tool. We'll be watching that and infusing the questions throughout the session. We'll also be sending out an email with the recording, an email with some more tools, an email with the slides, probably not with the next 24 hours. So look forward to that for more resources. So with that, Mike, I'm gonna jump right into today's discussion. We thought it'd be good just to review the overall Nexenta portfolio. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about NexentaStor, our full-featured SDS for enterprise applications. As I mentioned last week, we discussed our scale-out SDS cloud-native solution that's really designed for those cloud-native applications. And next week, we're going to talk more about our enterprise NAS for public cloud, Nexentacloud. And then we've got our NexentaFusion, our centralized management analytics, which we're going to talk about that today because it's such tight integration and such a key component to the overall management structure for NexentaStor. We'll talk a little bit about Nexentacloud and how that comes into play today, but more in next session. So we're really going to be talking about the two ends of the technology today. To give you a little bit more on where these technologies fit, we've got NexentaFusion, as I mentioned, is our overall management single pane of glass orchestration for our technology. On the bottom right, our scale-out object file block technology, more designed for those big data, IoT, machine learning, AI, cold archive types of workloads. But today we're going to focus a lot on those traditional enterprise-grade block file technologies and really dig into that technology itself. If we look at the product NexentaStor and some of the differentiators, here's really some of the components which we're going to highlight throughout the session and some of the themes we're going to cover. We'll talk a little bit more about the feature set of the technology and how we feel there's really no compromise moving to a software-defined technology solution versus maybe some of your traditional legacy storage solutions. We're going to talk about the perpetual licensing and how moving to a software model and moving at with Nexenta, you're making an investment once for a certain capacity, and you really own that license over a longer period of time. We're going to spend some time talking about the different tiers of support, including flash, hybrid, and all disk. And we're going to get into a demonstration a little bit on the UI. So you can see some of the modern look and feel, some of the simplicity that we've brought to the overall day-to-day management of the solution. And behind all of this, Mike's going to spend a lot of time talking about the REST API that we've built as a core of this technology that enables the NexentaFusion product, but really enables you for other platforms, other technologies, or to get other analytics out of the NexentaStor platform if that is right for your infrastructure. So before I hand it over to Mike to get more into the deeper technical discussion around the product, I just wanted to share with everyone the target use cases and really, I think this is a key value that we bring if you look at the NexentaStor platform and solution, how we're able to, with a single software technology, address a large amount of your traditional legacy applications, right? And everything from The far right-hand side, where we've done a lot of great business with service providers, healthcare organizations, to provide that backup or archive in a all-disk configuration. Have a high number of our customers running this in a virtual environment or running traditional just file-based services for their business in a hybrid configuration. And we're seeing a lot of pickup over the last couple of years around all-flash configuration. Some of these are the higher capacity all-flash configurations, or maybe even the smaller ones for those high-performance databases that might be necessary for their business. So we're going to talk about the feature set a little bit more here in a second, but I wanted to kind of set this to give you ideas. You're looking at how you might be able to apply this technology to your business and where these different pieces Mike's going to talk about here over the next few moments about the technology itself. Mike, any other comments on the use cases that you want to hit before we get deeper into the NexentaStor and NexentaFusion technologies?
No, I think one of the things is we'll definitely kind of tie some of these use cases back into some of the exact features, so we can kind of get people a real good correlation between where the things fit for one or the other. So I think we'll dig more into and kind of call some of these out as we go. But I think we can probably jump into the product set and features.
Good stuff. I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. So as Don had pointed out, obviously, we really want to talk about this high-performance file and block solution that we have with NexentaStor. Now, first off, one of the things that really differentiates a software-defined file and block solution is the way that we can deploy it. And I'll touch on this a few times throughout, but we can either deploy as a bare metal install. So we are the operating system. We handle everything from the storage OS all the way up through the presentation layer and the management side of what you're going to present out, whether you're presenting out file with 10 through 40 gig NFS, SMB access, all that active directory integration that you need in most enterprises, or whether you're doing block storage with Fiber Channel or iSCSI, again, using some of the more performant factors as well on that. The other option, and something that comes up a lot outside of just running bare metal, where we just do a few head nodes and JBOD storage behind it, is to run as a virtual storage appliance. And this comes up quite a bit recently, especially with the growth of the hyperconverged market and some of the really high performance block storage solutions that are out on the market today. Both of those provide a nice solution for your virtual machines, for you to be able to present a subset of your needed data. The problem is what it doesn't give you oftentimes is the file services that's needed on top of that. And that's something that the virtual storage appliance really does excel at, to run as a VSA on top of the hyperconverged, utilizing the resiliency of the storage on the back end of the HCI solution, or utilizing that block storage and presenting that back out for NFS and SMB usage. Now, that comes up a lot of times in branch offices or departmental solutions, where maybe you're putting in a vSAN solution, or you're putting in any of the other HCI plays that you might be using, but there's storage there that you're not utilizing because you've only got so many VMs, they only take up so much space, you've got some compute. Now let your users access the file data as well. Now, building that out on kind of where the feature set is, and I'm going to dig into a few of these features specifically as we move on down the road here, but starting off, it is a 2-node active-active cluster. And by that, we mean that each of those nodes can be presenting out storage at the same time, giving you the performance of the CPU memory in each one of the head nodes individually to make sure that you're getting your best performance. Now, this can scale from a smaller build that you maybe don't have 2 head nodes. Maybe you're only needing 1 and you don't need that cluster availability with some storage internal to that machine, or upwards of 5 petabytes worth of storage. So a lot of times we hear, well, I need a large environment, so I have to look at scale out. Well, that's not the case with the size of drives and JBODs today. Most people, when you talk about how large it is, large is relative. And 5 petabytes is a pretty good size when you're looking at things like 60 and 84 bay JBODs, 6, 8, 10, and even larger terabyte hard disks to be able to get that long-term retention. some of those really large ones really play in well for that back of an archive use case that Don mentioned. So if you're pointing it for a Commvault or a Veeam as a backup target and replacing that dated tape solution, or you just want to have a more cost-effective disk-to-disk backup solution, that gives you an option for that. The reason we can go that size is really because we do have an unlimited file system space underneath of it, as well as having the feature sets that a lot of these are kind of table stakes for enterprise storage today. You expect that you're going to be able to do snapshots and clones and have data reduction on the appliance. You're not expecting that you're not going to be able to do replication. You want to have that built into it. Now, all of that, while we're software side on it, we realize that it's not just about the software. It does matter on what the hardware underneath is, and you need to protect that hardware because things like drives fail. In all reality, hard disks are known to fail over time, and you just have to be able to account for that. That's why we provide things like either a striping or mirroring all the way up for 1, 2, and with those large drives, what comes in really handy is being able to do a third drive of parity. So when you're running a large environment with big 10, 12 terabyte drives, you can have 3 drives that are helpful as that parity, just in case you have those failures. Larger drives obviously take longer to rebuild, so you want to make sure you've got better protection in place. So we provide that with that extra drive of parity. Now, these next few features are ones I'm going to dig into a little bit deeper in some coming slides, but we do have replication is integrated into it. And the nice thing is the entire solution is all in the same pricing model. So we have a very few plugins onto it. This is all built around a single licensing model that you're going to buy the NexentaStor solution. Now, if you want to have things like a continuous async, that's a little bit of a plugin. Or if you want to have those 2 head nodes, those are. Outside of that, all of this is in one package. Now, that includes the ability, once you have that HA solution, to have things like a Metro HA environment. So if you need to stretch that across a geographic area, more of a metropolitan area, you can have that cluster stretched across a metropolitan area. And if you're places like a service provider or even a large enterprise that you want to make sure that you're controlling how much storage is being used for who, you can do things like QoS that we'll touch on in a future slide here in a sec. You add that all into things like the VMware integration, OpenStack integration, things that you need to have to run this in the enterprise, and it really rounds out the ability to use this as your primary, secondary, and even your backup storage, all with the same management platform. Now, we do license this on a perpetual model on it too. So it is fully supported on its own raw capacity as you put behind it because we manage at disk, and that's how the enterprise license works. For those smaller ones and people using it at home, for the real small environments, for non-production uses at home, we do offer a community one as well. We've always been a big supporter of the open source in our community, and we want to continue that, and that's obviously available on our community site. So going into the first of the features on it, I'm going to touch on that storage QoS. Now, this came up when we were talking to some of our service provider customers, and they had this issue where they were presenting out different storage types. They would have an all-disk solution, they had purchased an all-flash solution, and they were able in the past to have these multiple layers, and they could charge their customers appropriately for a gold, silver, bronze type support. Now, when they've moved into doing better usage of their data center, making it more resilient, making their data center more efficient, they've gone to a lot of all-flash solutions. Now, when they do that, what it stopped allowing them to do was separate out what their users got. They wanted to be able to control to make sure that one tenant that was that noisy neighbor wasn't going to be able to impact the rest of their users that were also paying for that level of support. So by doing that, we're allowing them to set a limit on the performance or from an NFS data store, specifically for things like VMware. I mean, that's really where this is, its bread and butter is doing an NFS data store to VMware and saying this tenant gets this amount, this tenant gets a different amount, and lets you do different access and control what they get. It also works well in things like an enterprise environment. The best example I heard from a customer one time was they had a marketing team that was often working on doing different videos and different setups, but it came up one time that they were setting up for a trade show that they needed to get these videos done, they're processing against the storage, at the end of a month, at the same time that the accounting department was trying to finalize the books to do payroll. Now, Don, I'm sure you'll agree with me. I personally, well, even though we do a lot with marketing, I want to make sure payroll gets done. So at that point, we got to make sure we separate that out and make sure they get the resources that each group needs as well. So this goes all the way up from the VM and Datastore level when you combine it with either VM level control at the hypervisor or way down into the storage with the TOS. So it's just a great feature for either the departmental or into the service provider space. Now, going on to the next feature that we're going to look at, as soon as we get slide change, here it comes, is our replication. Now, our replication, a lot of times people look at it and say, well, everybody should have replication. What we've found is over time, a lot of the replication has just been, okay, we'll send it. Maybe we send everything. Maybe we don't schedule as well. There are a lot of little pieces that we really want to improve around replication. And we built it down into our kernel level of the product to allow for better performance as well as a better RPO on things. One of the things that I think is also key is the ability to do things like consistency groups. Now, if you're running a web environment and you want to make sure you have that snapshot, if you don't take a snapshot at the same time with the consistency group of the database as well as the web server, they're not going to be in sync, and that snapshot's not going to do you any good. So we want to have that both on our volumes as well as our file systems. So it doesn't, this is the same whether it's file or block. It also allows you to have a single scheduler across the board for this. Now that scheduler can be used for just taking snapshots. It can be used for replication. It can also be used, we utilize it for our near zero RPO with our continuous replication as well. So with that, the scheduled replication goes with that standard enterprise license. Like I said, it's fully included. It will let you do a replica every 15 minutes if you want. So you can schedule that, and it can be different schedules and different amount of data is kept on the source and destination site as well. Now, oftentimes, I want to make sure I keep a snapshot local for that. Oh no, I deleted something from my users. But I don't necessarily need to keep that hourly at my remote site. My remote site, I probably need to keep it daily, and I want to be able to keep that maybe for 7 days, so we'll go back to it before I've completely pushed everything off to a backup device. Now, when you add in the continuous asynchronous option, we can now drop that down to around a 1 minute RPO for it. Sometimes even less. It's all dependent on bandwidth. Now, we'll basically just keep trying to send that replica as long as there's space on it. It really gives you a lot faster replication and the ability to just almost get a near sync replication between them. Another thing that I think is important to note is we don't require that it has to be HA on both sides. So a lot of customers think about that secondary site as an insurance policy, and they don't want to necessarily spend as much and have the HA plugin, have an additional head node that costs them the compute. They can go a single node on the secondary side. It also doesn't need to be the same type of disk. So maybe you're doing a more performant disk on your primary side, that secondary side, maybe you're using larger, bigger disk on that second side that it might be slower, but you're not worried about it because it is just a secondary site. So you get a lot of different flexibility within this HPR solution. So I think the last of the features that we're going to really mention here is the ability to do data at rest encryption. Now this comes up more and more today with all the compliance, with all the breaches that have happened. I'm sure I'm not the only one that I feel like gets a new debit card number about once every 3 or 4 months because some bank or new credit card number, some bank has had some sort of issue and they have to send a new card out. Just like when it comes to that side of it, we know that the enterprises are more and more concerned about having their data encrypted at rest. And with that, we actually do support the data at rest encryption utilizing self-encrypting drives. We then work with third-party key management solutions to do that. We often get asked, do we do the key management ourselves? One of the things that we believe on that is we're going to go ahead and partner with those best of breeds. Those guys make their living making sure that things are secure and you get the best security of your data. We don't want to be we're not going to be the ones, we're not security guys, we're storage guys. So we want to make sure you get your storage, but you get it as secure as possible by using those best of breed third-party solution. Oh, looks like we dropped out for a sec. Here we go. I forgot about the one other feature that I did want to go ahead and mention, and I mentioned it briefly during the feature set, but the ability to do more of a metropolitan cluster with 0 RPO on it. What this allows us to do is we partner with Addo to do a fiber bridge connection and utilizing our same SAS connections, the same head nodes, and give you a 0 RPO synchronous mirror between two sites. Now, this really comes into play if you really need high performance, but you need to make sure it's protected. We see this a lot with our European business. We do see it some in the US as well. It works really well for campus type solutions. So if it's a university and you want to make sure that your data is split to opposite sides in 2 data centers, maybe a campus of a business, some of the larger enterprises are starting to look at this to make sure that if they have a data center failure, their data continues and they keep running as close to 24/7 as possible with their applications. So this will work up to 50 miles between the sites doing this replication. It is obviously dependent upon having the bandwidth and the interconnect between the 2 sites, but allows you to have true mirrored access of your data between a site A and a site B. So Don, before I jump into each of the deployment scenarios, anything on those features you think that jumped out at you or that we should make sure we highlight?
No, Mike, as you mentioned, the security piece is coming up more and more, and I think you touched on the importance of us partnering with best of breed, right? So that's something that we work close with the folks primarily today with Gemalto. So I think that's a great solution. You've seen some great success there. You hit on Metro HA, right? We're seeing actually quite a bit of pickup around that campus cluster, right? So maybe 2 different research portions of a university that's spread out over a larger campus, wanting to have that replication availability. And then HPR, right? The high performance replication is starting to come up more and more, and really lowering that RPO is interesting, right? I think it's a lot of our customers are seeing the advantages of that after they get it deployed and wanting to learn more. So glad you're able to kind of call out those 3 components because they seem to come up more and more in our customer conversations.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing is all of those features really work regardless of what we're doing here on our deployment scenarios. So as I kind of run through these, the far left is really your traditional model. That's what we've had. It's your bare metal node install. You're going to install with a traditional single or dual head node, JBOD SAS connected behind it, and then manage that through NexentaFusion. Now, bear in mind, all of these scenarios we manage with NexentaFusion or the vCenter plugin, as you can see on the middle. It doesn't have to be a VSA to run there. You can manage it and still access your file shares, manage your file shares through the vCenter plugin or through NexentaFusion. Now, all of that, when you look at it on the VMware side, or for even many of the other hypervisors, if you're running a hyperconverged environment or you're presenting out some SAN storage behind it, to be able to present out as that VSA gives you that middle one. Now, we're going to touch on the far right a bit more next week when we talk about the Nexentacloud solution, but I think it is important to point out that it does allow you to really blend in the cloud with your on-prem. So you truly get a hybrid storage solution between the 2 environments when you're looking at a Nexentacloud in AWS, whether your Fusion is out there or your Fusion is on-prem, and tying that in with replication to that on-prem app for your enterprise applications. Now, I mentioned that you're going to be able to have that replication on it. All of these are all built upon the same API model as well. And as so we get to the demo, and I want to kind of make sure we kind of flow through these next few, so we have a few minutes for the demo. You'll see that you can see the REST API for NexentaStor for on-prem, replication to Nexentacloud, all managed with a NexentaFusion solution. So it really leverages the entire environment for your private cloud or your hybrid and public cloud.
Mike, real quick, one of our early customers in this technology, I don't want to steal too much from next week, was an interesting use case around closing a data center, right? They were running 3 Nexenta data centers across the West Coast. Do you mind maybe sharing a little bit more real quick with the folks, giving that scenario and a little bit of background there?
Yeah, sure. So they were running actually multiple data centers around the country, and one of their data centers had some aging hardware in it, was running NexentaStor, but had some about 5-year-old hardware. They were looking at whether they should do a hardware refresh. They were already active users of AWS for a lot of their development work and some of their test dev. Even some of their production systems were running out there. And they decided, you know what, I just need to have that storage access close to it. Whether it was for replication, for their kind of the DR target, that they were sending some of it to the DR target directly to Nexentacloud then, or for accessing the file and block off of it for those remote users. Because one of the things that I think has come up quite often when we get asked about, well, I don't know if I can use Nexentacloud for a branch office, the question comes up, well, are you hosting their email at that branch office? Well, no, we're on Office 365 or we're on a Google app. Okay, do you use things like Salesforce in your everyday business? Well, yeah, we rely on it all the time. Well, because of that, the internet connections to these branch offices has to be stable and consistent anyway. So being able to provide file services that comes across there, why keep it local? And that's really what they looked at and said, that doesn't make sense. I can keep my file services out in the cloud, let people access it because I'm already paying for that bandwidth anyway. Let's utilize it and let's shrink down on the operational cost of all these little spots. But I can also now not have to replace hardware at one site and do that all on operational cost, operational time, and pay on a more annual or an hourly basis. So it does give a lot of different flexibility, a lot of options. And I think the cloud solution goes right into what we've always believed software defined really means, and it's all about the flexibility we can provide for our customers around the storage environment.
That's great, Mike. Thank you.
So I've definitely touched on this quite a few times on what you can get with that virtual NAS services doing the VSA. And I don't want to feel like we're really just drilling this one in here, but it has come up so much so recently. We really wanted to make sure that everyone really has a good knowledge of it and, excuse me, what it can do. So the way it really deploys, we do deploy, like I said, as a VSA, we just deploy as a VM. We consume VMDKs directly from the ESX environment, whether it is from vSAN or a traditional ESX environment, and then we can present that back out. Now, when you're doing this in the branch office, it also gives you the ability to do things like replication and consolidation of those. So you can replicate from those branch offices back to an HQ, to a centralized box, or maybe you get rid of a piece of hardware out there and not have to buy a secondary little NAS or manage another NAS, because you still manage this with NexentaFusion all in a single pane of glass. The other pieces that really help with the VMware environment on it, and we often get asked, well, VMware is always pushing, well, what about things like vVols or VAI? And we do have those capabilities already built into the product. We spent a good bit of time building out our vCenter plugin. It is one of the more advanced vCenter plugins available in it, allowing you to really see both the analytics as well as the management of your physical or virtual NexentaStor appliances. And then we also add in deep integration with VAI for block, as well as having vVols around the NFS environments to give you the full capability. All of that also adds in the ability to do things through our vCenter plugin and add in tenants using the VMware tenant policy. So you can do things like have a multi-tenant environment, using, if you already have it split out in your VMware environment, present a VSA strictly to that tenant, and then still be able to manage that through the plugin. They would only see the VSA that you provide to them. While giving the analytics, that could all be based off of one big cluster in the back end. Really, again, all about the flexibility of what you can provide. Now, it's not always all about VMware. A lot of people have been moving towards the OpenStack environment. We've actually been upstreamed with our Cinder driver since 2012. We were one of the first Cinder drivers that was out there and available, and we've been working with the OpenStack environment for quite a long time. We also obviously have support for Manila if that's needed, and that Cinder one is over both file and block. We find most people tend to use the file side of it, but it could be on both. So it's been out there for quite a while. You can actually access the drivers and get them right off our GitHub site. So just nexenta.github.io. And then also, as users play more and more into the container space, we do have those plugins for the persistent volumes around Docker and then Kubernetes as well as we move on. Now, I touched on those deployment models on the bare metal side of things. And really, one of the things that has always been a question mark for software defined is it hard to deploy? Do I have to figure everything out? Do I have to buy every piece? We've really built out these reference architecture models to make that simple. So there are full stack use case centric reference architectures from each of the OEMs. Some of them are actually manufacturer sold, packaged, actually preloaded, pre-configured, and shipped right from the factory from those OEMs. Others are built by your channel partners and by the value-added resellers that are out there. So you have the choice of whether you're looking at a Supermicro, Lenovo, Dell, any of the major server providers, whether you want a small environment all the way up through that 5 petabyte with a reference architecture that we've already put together. All of that being based off of a detail HCL that you have access to as well.
Hey, Mike, real quick too, one thing that ties to this, I know is important for a lot of our customers is, again, if you're looking for flexibility of software defined, but want to have that single point and almost appliance-like feel, we've got tight relationships with, you mentioned Supermicro, Lenovo, Dell, where each of those folks are also taking first line calls, right? So if you have a question, you can reach out to them. They will troubleshoot. If it's hardware, help you address, work through those issues. If it's more software related questions, they then work with us on the background, right, to then help resolve or answer your questions. So again, if you're looking for that a little bit closer to the appliance as you move into a little bit more flexible model, we've got and made some investments in our partnerships to support you with those type of support functions.
Yeah, I think that is key. People don't have to stress as much about, oh, do I call the software guys? Do I call the hardware guys? We've built those relationships on the back end to make that simple for the end user. Now, I mentioned the API, and I'm not going to touch on this too much because I'm going to actually show it to you in the demo as well. But everything is based on this API. The nice thing is it's fully self-documenting. So for you scripters out there or guys that are doing development work, it makes it much easier to do things against the appliances because we will give you the commands, tell you can try it out, you can see what you need to put in to make sure you're not putting the wrong command in or using the API. Differently, it gives you all the documentation right off of the appliance in a nice, easy browser window. Again, on NexentaFusion, I think showing you this does just as much good on this, but it does give you a lot of the capabilities, things that I've mentioned along the way, whether it is support for the latest all-flash devices on it, things like NVMe support that's already in the appliance, support for SMB3 around Hyper-V, and then, of course, the VMware integration, all the replication, and all of this is done within utilizing that API and within the Fusion console and that single pane of glass. So with that being said, let me jump over to mine. I know Don's going to go ahead and give me control here in a sec.
Mike, you should have controls. And folks, I don't want to just briefly apologize. I've seen a ton of great questions coming in. Looking at the clock, we just want to be respectful for your time while also getting in as much of the demonstration as we can. So apologies for not getting those in earlier. We'll try to sneak some of them in before we wrap up. If not, we'll make sure we get you some answers as follow-up.
So I think the first thing I mentioned, that API, and this is just off of one of my appliances already. So I can go look and pretty much do anything I want on the appliance. So if I want to just see, okay, let me see what file systems I have, I can simply scroll down and tell it to try it out here. And it will show me all of the different file systems that I have available today. I think if I need to do the same thing, I'm going to look at my pools. You can also post against this too, but you can see what the commands are to utilize. So on here, obviously, it gives me a little more option for different things I can choose. Do I want to know free data? How do I want to limit this? And if I try that, I'll get even more data. So I can look at, here's a big stripe that I have set. It's online. How do I have it set? What am I getting on dedupe? How many disks do I have? I get to see a lot of the different information right here, so you can actually know what you need to do to ask things against it and give you all the different variables that are available per option. Now, the great thing about this is all of our management consoles are built on this. So when I jump over to my NexentaFusion system, which is also based on that API, as well as the vCenter plugin, our CLI as well, you'll see that I've got multiple different appliances already tied into my NexentaFusion solution here. Now, you can see I've either got an HA cluster, I've got some non-HA clusters sitting here. These are actually all VSAs I use for demos quite a bit. And then also one of our Nexentacloud instances. So I just built this one out here, but I'm going to go ahead and start one of those because it does take a sec, and then we can come back and see it as it builds. On this, it's a very simple click through right through NexentaFusion. Make sure that you have your credentials set for AWS. I'll go ahead and give it a name. I'll call it Demo123. Give it a password so that I can access it later, and we'll go ahead and inject the password for you. You can also use your AWS instance ID. Select the time zone, pick some basic things, and this will give you all the options of the regions it's available in. Your VPCs, even into your subnet to make sure you're giving it the right space. And then I'll go ahead and tell it that I want to go ahead and use the ports on its security group. The next thing I'll do is just, what am I using that Nexentacloud for? We'll give it a size, and we can do whatever we want, and I'll dig into this a little more next week, but I want you guys to see how easily integrated it is to NexentaFusion. It really is a piece of NexentaFusion at this time. As that is going and deploying, it's going and talking to AWS. So while we're doing that, I want to go in and I'm going to pick one of my demo VSAs here. Now, there's nothing going on this box right now, so we don't have any data. The reason there's nothing going on is I don't have any pools created. So kind of the first thing a user is going to do normally is create the pool to start with. I'll go ahead and use the auto on this. One of the things I'll have to turn off is because I don't have multiple enclosures. I want to use the 10 gig drives, that's what's available. I'll go ahead and mirror them using both the drives. Now I know I'm going to use both these drives, using 20 gig raw and a 10 gig usable. So I do this, it creates the pool for me, sets everything up. I'm not going to go and worry about cache or log drives on this because I just want to get the pool created. Once the pool's created, that day in the life is what starts to happen now. Now, what an admin is normally going to be looking at is, what do I do for file systems? Now, I want to add this first file system. And when I look at it, I've already got that demo pool that we've just created. So I'll name this file system, I'll just call it file system 1. Now, I can set things like record size to make sure it matches if you're using something like a database or VMware to make sure you're using the right record size. And I've always got advanced features I can add in as well if you're used to it with our traditional NexentaStor users. Now, that file service right now, though, can't do anything. So first thing I'm going to want to do is share that out via NFS. Now, to do that, I can choose and set the ACLs right away, whether it's for VMware, whether it's for an NFS client, or whether you just want to set your own ACL. At this point, I'll set it for VMware. And now it's available via NFS. The nice thing is the same one, I can also share using SMB. And right away, there's my share name. I'll save it. And now I have this set by NFS or SMB. The rate limit here is where that QoS that I talked about comes into play. Now, you may say that, but the next thing a user is probably going to do is want to protect that file system. Now, I can take an ad hoc snapshot that I can take right now, or I mentioned those schedulers. So I want to go ahead and add a new service. I'll just tell it to do it hourly, and I'll set the snapshot. I can also do replication here. I don't have another system set up on this VSA to replicate to, but it would use the same replication schedules. So it simply adds in who the remote host is. But for this one, I'm just going to do a snapshot. Tell it to do it hourly. I'm going to run it once an hour at the top of the hour, and I want to keep 3 copies locally. If you're doing this for replication, it'll also ask you here how many copies you want to keep remotely. Then I go ahead and create the schedule, and that'll go out and set that. So now it's protected. If I go back to my file systems, I can see that it's protected with scheduled snapshot. Once we start using this, you'll get a little bit more. One of the things that is key to that is I can go to data protection. I can see those protection services. So if I want to say, go look at my scheduled snapshots, since I just created that one, it's already there. I can also look at the hardware and see exactly what's going on. This one, it is a virtual environment, so we see a little bit less, but I could see all the different processors, what kind of memory, HBL, as well as all my disks. So if I jump over to one of my other appliances, it jumps to cluster 50 here. I'll be able to see a lot more on what's going on from the physical aspect on this system, specifically under things like that management side of things. Now, the other thing that's nice to see is on this one, I've got some things going on. I switch over, I actually have some stuff running against my demo cluster here. So we'll actually see some analytics. We actually have some stuff going. So you can see latency. You can see if I've got this share going, this top NFS share, what's configured. This one doesn't have any access to it right now. All of this is part of our analytics screen. This is our initial dashboard. Now, the dashboard can be edited. It's the same across all of your appliances here. But what is new on here is I can also say, I want to see create my own canvas. Now, all of these analytics screens are completely widget-based. So I can do things like add in the cache hit rate, maybe add in, I think we have some NFS share performance over here. So I select my share, tell it to look at all the ops. But I don't want to just see that. I also want to see the latency. And then I also want to see what kind of bandwidth I'm using. Now, right now, this is set as real time. You can also set this back as far as you want. We keep about 2 years worth of data on here. And we do concatenate it so it doesn't take up all the space. But say I want to go back for the last 24 hours, specifically on the bandwidth, I can see where we're at, both read and write bandwidth against this share. So now I have a lot of access on what I'm looking at for the analytics. These analytics apply across the board, whether I'm looking at an HA cluster, a single node, or one of our cloud ones. And you notice this one's already deployed and available today. This was our Nexentacloud instance that we just deployed. I can already go in and create the pool if I wanted to. And you'll notice I have 3 gigs of space here. I have 3 drives available. I have to create a pool right off of my Nexentacloud environment and treat it just like another site in my environment. So I think that really gives you a good idea. I know we're pushing time a little bit. I wanted to make sure we got you a little bit of demo to see how easy the interface really is to use and to manage. Don, let me toss that back over to you now.
Yes, thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. You had a lot going there fast, so I appreciate you running through that. Let me show my screen. Let me go back to presentation. And as we wrap up and move into the questions of this session, a quick reminder, we've already talked about it a couple of times. We've got the Nexentacloud session, same time, next Thursday the 7th. We'll note if you go back to the registration page, you'll be able to see this webinar recording there, again, in the next 24 hours. The link for last week's session is up there. So another great spot for you to go and revisit some of the past webinars. And another great thing we've really invested a lot in is some of the resources. So if you want to dig deeper into the NexentaStor and NexentaFusion solutions, get into more of the specifics, get deeper into the features, and we went through a lot of information in a very rapid period of time. This product guide is a 30 some odd page document that really gets into the details. And it's that nice balance of giving you the overview, the why around some of these things, and then the details a little bit more specific from a technical standpoint. That document can be found on the NexentaStor landing page. We talked a lot about our abilities to deliver our technology, NexentaStor, to add file capabilities to hyperconverge and block storage. A new white paper that we actually just released yesterday up on our website under the white papers section is available today. So a great piece that talks about a little bit more around the integration, gives you some modeling around the different architectures, gets into specific use cases, touches on the integration with VMware, a nice document there. And then another white paper on our product Nexentacloud, giving you a little bit more on the, again, use cases, details, background of how this ties into potentially your environment if you're an existing Nexenta customer, or if this is something that you're looking at moving more and more of your applications to the public cloud, how you might be able to leverage Nexentacloud and NexentaFusion a little bit in that paper for this. So again, a lot of great resources there available for you. And with that, we're really wrapped up the core portion of this session. And with that, I'm gonna pop back out to our Q&A. But while I'm doing that, Mike, any closing remarks or anything that you wanted to hit on?
Yeah, well, I think the big thing that I'd like people to remember walking out of this is that NexentaStor and NexentaFusion have taken the flexibility and the freedom of SDS and taken it to a next level to make it truly enterprise class, simple to use, simple to manage, and allows you to use that just like you would every other enterprise class system out on the market. Remembering things like the option to do the VSA for those branch offices. I think having the ability to take a look at those white papers, you can kind of scan through them. There's enough pictures. People won't be reading the entire time. They are, but it'll give you a good bit of information on it. I know none of us want to read just text and text and text for 15 pages. So there's a good number of graphics along the way to make it really sink in and see how it can fit in your environment. I think every environment is different. And the nice thing about that freedom and flexibility of SDS is I think we can work with just about all of them.
Great, Mike. One thing I'll also mention is the demo. If you'd like to get a little bit more one-on-one, a little bit more detailed on the demonstration, can always just email sales@nexenta.com and reach out to our team. They're always available and flexible to dig into those deep dives and get you more familiar, talk a little bit more specific about your use case and how you'd be able to utilize NexentaStor and NexentaFusion is a great way to leverage the actually same demo environment Mike mentioned to give you a little bit more around the different scenarios that might be out there. Mike, with that, I'm gonna jump into some of the questions and apologize. Again, we may have a little bit out of context for some of these, but one came in around SMB3, RDMA support, and QoS.
Meaning, do we have all of that specifically for QoS specifically around SMB? So the QoS is built at the file system level. So when you set it, you actually set it on the NFS share, but it will apply to both the SMB or the NFS share when it applies because of the way we do our shares. So specifically on that, I'd love to hear. I'm assuming that's coming in from a Hyper-V based service provider potentially. So it'd be great to kind of I'd like to dig a little deeper on how you want to use that. So make sure you reach back out to us on that one. And I'd love to hear more on the use case on that one.
Cool. Mike, this one came in early in the discussion. Active controller. So the I/O from the particular host will manipulating canned load balancing automatically.
So the way that it's done is each of the hosts manages a pool. During the demo, you notice I built out a small pool with just a few drives with that mirror set that I created. Each one of those head nodes would own a pool at any given time. So it doesn't load balance between them. What it allows you to do is have the resiliency of the second head node. If in fact you need it, if you have a hardware failure on one of them, it will fail over to the other. But as long as you have two pools, you can be presenting one out of each head node and get the performance of both of the pools.
Cool. Mike, one other follow-up question on QoS, asking around XGSI and fiber channel supports, kind of where we're at with that and thoughts and plans.
So as of today, we're not planning on doing the QoS on XGSI and fiber channel. Really, the customer demand has been around the NFS side of things, primarily around VMware. There is a roadmap item for being able to do it, but I can't give a date on where that's going to be right now. If there's a specific need for it on one or the other, we'd be happy to look at and make sure we add that into the roadmap to make sure we get the priorities right. The great thing about being not the largest company out there is we can be very nimble, and we're a rather nimble development shop that as customer demands need it, we're able to produce things more often. But as of today, that's not in the direct plan.
I guess it's some of the agility of a software model too. But yeah, please, if you have more details and want to discuss more, please do reach out. Mike, going to the security portion of our discussion, in the future, can Nexenta do inline encryption for data at rest?
So there is some things that we're looking at for some inline encryption around some of the protocols. So yes, that there's some of that is roadmapped. However, again, though, the big key I think to that is we're not going to manage the keys. Managing the keys is really where it comes into play. I want to make sure that it is being locked down. Outside of that, using the SEDs tends to give most of the people where they need. Most people don't end up encrypting their entire system, or it's a small system they're doing it with. So you don't necessarily need SEDs for your entire thing. You do SEDs for a pool if you want it, and point it at just that. So the inline encryption for it is something that's there. It's not. It is a future item at this point, though.
And I think a follow-up question on security in general, but third-party data at rest solutions will have performance impact, correct?
So it actually doesn't. So we actually, especially when you're using self-encrypting drives, the third party is strictly for the key management. So once the disk is set, unless you're trying to remove the disk and move it and put it in a different pool, or you're doing something significant with the disk that it needs to be, the key is needed for the encryption. It doesn't actually cause very much overhead at all when you're using that in that sense. We're not using it as a gateway. The data doesn't have to go through the key management and then over to the disk. Once the disk is set to be encrypted, the disk writes as normal, so it's not a performance impact over time.
Great, Mike. So those were all the kind of core questions that came in. Thank you, everybody, for reaching out and clarifying some of those components. Really do appreciate that. Before we wrap up, one other thing that did not highlight, but definitely should, is we do have a free trial for our technologies on our website. So just go to Nexenta.com, top right-hand corner, you'll see free trial. Register for them right there, and we can work with you to get you the bits and get started. Mike touched on the community version. Is a great another way to get started with our technology, working with your home labs. We've got a lot of folks that have over the years run it in their home labs and then over time brought it into their enterprise just because they become more familiar with it and enjoyed and appreciated the feature functionality which we offered. As a reminder, again, you'll get an email from us in the next 24 hours or so with the deck, the recording, some more resources. If you have any more questions, need any more help, easiest, fastest, simple way is sales@nexenta.com. A number of us watch that email, and we will respond to you as fast as we can. So with that, Mike, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate the presentation and demonstration. Thank you everybody for joining us here today. And we look forward to seeing you next Thursday, same time, talking about Nexenta Cloud. Take care, everyone.